Right, good evening members and our visitors tonight. Welcome to the Development Committee on the 23rd of January 2020. Our usual emergency evacuation announcement. Should we be required to evacuate the building, would you please leave the building via the nearest available exit to the chamber. Our assembly point will be in the public car park at the side of the Civic Suite. Please don't delay your evacuation to collect any belongings. Please don't return into the building until given permission to do so by council staff. Please also note that the meeting will be audio recorded, and can I please remind you to turn your mobile phones off or to silent. Right. Item 1 is apologies for absence. It's likely that Councillor Weston is not going to make it at this moment in time. We have no substitute members attending, but our non-members, Councillor Rowe, Councillor Dray, Councillor Lumley, Councillor Wilkinson, Councillor Sperring, Councillor Steptoe, Councillor Mr Hoy, Councillor Mrs Hoy, Councillor Mrs Mason. Okay, thank you. Minutes of the meeting held on 19th of December 2019. Will you be happy for me to sign those as a correct and accurate record of that meeting? Thank you very much. Item 5 is our declarations of interest. Councillor Steptoe.
Thanks, Chairman. With regards to items 7 and 8, just to record that I am also the county councillor for that area.
Councillor Mrs Rowe.
Thank you, Chairman. Item 6, by virtue of being a member of Raleigh Town Council. However, I did not attend the council meeting when this item was discussed. Thank you.
Dray.
Item 6 as well, Mr Chairman, as member of Raleigh Town Council, and again I'm not a member of that planning committee.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Sperring.
Likewise, Chairman.
Councillor Lumley. Okay, just in the nick of time as usual. Right, okay, let's get started then on the... Oh, Councillor Stanley, sorry missed you there. Okay. Members, can you remember to use your microphone, because with the aircon buzzing away, sound's not carrying quite as it normally does. So, item 6. Land to the rear of 98 to 128 High Street, Raleigh. And just a reminder, as I've already mentioned, Councillor Canal, Councillor Reeves, you seen the addendum? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. This is an application for a mixed-use development containing 35 flats and 2 commercial units. On the screen is the location plan, and you'll see that the site's an irregular shape to the rear of properties on the High Street in Raleigh. The site is partly within the conservation area. Access is proposed between numbers 110 and 106 High Street, close to the roundabout junction with Eastwood Road. Immediately bordering the site are a mix of commercial units along the High Street at ground floor. Some of these units contain commercial uses above as well. So to take you through, these 2 units here are entirely commercial. You then get to a commercial unit at the ground floor here. We've fairly recently refused a residential unit at the first floor in this unit. Along here we have residential units above the ground floor commercial units. And this row of properties here has residential at first and second floor. This is then the library that adjoins adjacent to the western boundary, and then this part here is the playground to Raleigh Primary School, which is again to the west. This is the grassed playing area for the school as well. Then along this part of the northern boundary, you've got a residential property, number 7A Crown Hill, with its residential curtilage. And you've got another residential property to Crown Hill adjacent to this corner of the site. To the eastern boundary is a car parking area set on a slightly lower land level. And again, these properties here are commercial, This area here is residential at first floor. You've got one single-storey building. You've got a residential flat above the ground floor commercial use here. And this here is a ground floor retail unit with a gym use above. So there are a mixture of existing uses surrounding this site. If I can take you to the aerial image, this will show you some of the context, although it's a bit dark to see. But this is the access here through the between the two commercial buildings either side, and then you go in to what was these shows the buildings as a Dairy Crest site. So there's a mixture of buildings on there. This is the flat roof of the library adjacent, and the proposal seeks to demolish all of the existing buildings, but retaining the existing retaining wall that goes around the outside. This is the playground to the adjoining school, and you can see the grassed school field. This is that neighbouring commercial property here. Sorry, residential property number 7A Crown Hill. And then you can see the adjacent car park to the eastern boundary. If I can take you to the proposed site layout, please. So this is the proposed site layout. As you can see, vehicular access is using the existing access onto the high street. What would happen, that you can sort of see here, is that the access way sort of angles to this side. So as you look at the site, and I'll show you some photos in a short while, there is an existing access point into the site, which is not in this location. This proposed access is shifted slightly towards the east, and it would be in the position of one of the buildings on the site that's going to be demolished. So if you keep that in mind, I'll explain that in more detail shortly. So the vehicular access would come up the existing, slightly divert off at an angle, and then there would be a central sort of courtyard area with two disabled bays and some landscaping for use of the flatted block. The access would then go underneath on an undercroft towards the parking area that would be contained towards the western boundary adjacent to the library, and then this is part of that school playing yard to the north. The building itself would be U-shaped, so this was the access point in the middle, at ground floor, and it would be a combination of 1 and 2 bed flats to the ground floor, and it's a combination of 1 and 2 bed flats across all floors provided. The ground floor flats would benefit from amenity space towards the boundary, so between the sort of rear elevations and the boundary on all sides. And the first floor flats would benefit from balconies, as would the second and the storey at the top of the building. Integral refuse stores are proposed, so you've got one here to serve the commercial building here, and the commercial unit on the other side would have a refuse store here. So the commercial unit, would be either side of the development as you go up the entrance from the high street. There's a commercial vehicle space for parking here and here, either side of the access. There are also integral bin stores for the residential units, so there's one here, and throughout the building dotted around are some integral cycle stores. If I can take you to the elevations, please. Might just take a moment to load. I'll speak while it's loading. The building would be 4-storey with a 4th storey inset along part of the northern elevation. So you've got 4-storey building, but this part is inset, and that will show you more carefully that on the floor plans when we get to those. So that doesn't extend across the entire all the other stories on the building, and you'll see that part of the building is 2-storey adjacent to the northern boundary. So this image at the top is what you would see as you enter the site, and there would be a parking space here and here either side to serve the commercial units at the ground floor. The form of the building would be flat-roofed with a modern arrangement of fenestration and balconies provided to all floors above ground level. If I can take you to what we've got is some 3D images to show you the proposed development in its context. So this is as you look down the existing access. So what you'd see at ground floor level is one of the commercial units there. This image would have there would be a parking space for the commercial unit just here. And then you've got the balconies to the residential accommodation above. This, you can see in the background, is a two-storey element that would be set back towards the northern boundary. If you could take you to the next, if you scroll down on that image, yeah. So we then get a wider view. So back down Eastwood Road, looking towards the site, what you have is you can see the fourth storey, which will be formed of a different facing material to give a bit of contrast to the brickwork that will be used on the other floors. If I can take you to the last one, perhaps. And again, that'll show you the same part of the fourth floor there, but you just get a glimpse of the retail unit with the flats above that would be glimpsed obliquely on this, from looking from Eastwood Road in a sort of northwesterly direction. If I could take you through the photos, please. Yep, so this is an image of the existing access, and the part of the access up to this point, sorry, if you can go back to the last one. So part of the existing access is an adopted access by the County Council to the High Street, up to this point here, where it becomes a private drive. And you'll see at the moment there is a footway alongside here, but some sort of ad hoc parking does happen along here. This is the adjoining retail unit at ground floor with the gym above. I'll take you to the next one. So this is again showing the commercial premises. So this is entirely commercial, just to give you context of the surrounding uses adjacent to the access. The next one, please. So this is now within the site, looking back down the access towards the High Street. And you've got, this is the point at which the existing driveway veers towards the eastern boundary. This is all in sort of commercial use with the gym above, so there's no residential use bordering the site in that location. I can take you to the next one. This is a wider context, so there's an existing parking area for premises to the rear here. Next one, sorry, Katie. Thank you. So this shows you some of the residential uses that border the site towards the south. So this is the frontage of this building would be onto the High Street, and these are in residential use, this part of the building, and that's adjacent to the library building, which is here. This is the existing boundary fencing to the site, so this would go in the proposal, and what you'd have is the commercial unit at ground floor quite close to this boundary with some new fenestration in this location here. Next one, please, Katie. Thank you. So this is one of the buildings within the site, and which would be demolished as part of the proposal. And the proposed access point, well, the existing access is approximately here. The proposed one would be sort of part way along this building. So the building would go, and your access point would be part way along here. These two spaces here could be retained for use for parking within the proposed layout. And then this is the part of the private drive access way which veers off to the eastern boundary. So this is part of the building on the site that would be demolished as part of the proposal, and what you'd have here adjacent to this boundary is the other commercial unit. And then this is the eastern boundary. So this, no changes proposed to this boundary treatment here, and beyond that boundary is an area of parking. This is some existing parking for one of the adjacent units, the Co-op Funeral Care, and again that's adjacent to the eastern boundary. So these are the buildings within the site, so this is what it looks like at the moment. It's been vacant for some time, and so there's no existing commercial use, and all of this would be demolished as part of the proposal. I think there's one further image which is of looking west, so this is the wall which will be retained, and that's the library building to part of that boundary. If I take you back to the proposed site plan then, just to explain that the proposed use is for 35 flats, 2 commercial units, and this use is considered to accord with your Rayleigh Centre Area Action Plan. This identifies this vacant site as one for mixed use, including residential. The proposal would help to support the vitality and viability of the town centre. Whilst the principle of the proposed use is accepted, detailed considerations are also of importance and have been covered in the officer report. I'll just take you through some impacts in relation to residential amenity by looking at the first floor plan. So in terms of the ground floor, we're not concerned about any potential for overlooking, given that the existing boundary wall would be retained, is approximately 2 metres high. This is the first floor, and if we look at this, firstly this boundary to this side, you can see there are a number of balconies and a number of windows serving bedrooms and living spaces and kitchens towards this boundary. This boundary is immediately adjacent to the playground for Rayleigh Primary School, and then this corner of the site looking northwards is immediately adjacent to part of the playing field for that school. The northern boundary here then runs alongside, in quite close proximity to the rear garden of number 7A Crown Hill, and the proposal does seek to include a number of windows to various parts of the flats. So you've got bedrooms, lounges, and you've got balconies towards the eastern side. There is a condition at number 5 which we would just seek to update to require the obscure glazing to the windows at first floor here, and then again at second floor, because you'll see on the second floor plan the proposal does include similar fenestration here, which would be immediately adjacent to the rear boundary and the rear elevation of that dwelling. It's not shown, but the rear of the dwelling is approximately where my light might be, and then they've got a rear amenity space behind their property. So those would be obscure glazed to prevent any ability for direct overlooking there. As I said, above second floor level, so in the centre of the site, there's no fenestration proposed because this part is 2-storey only. And then if you take you to the next one, please, Katie. So this shows the final, so the top floor of the building with this bit quite inset from the northern boundary. So given the separation there, there's not concern relating to these windows that would be to these flats here. There are fenestration at first, second and third floor in both of these elevations, including balconies. But the residential uses I mentioned previously that are above the existing commercial uses on the high street, we say a sufficient distance between them to guard against any unreasonable level of overlooking. If I can take you to the proposed site plan again, just to point out that there are 21 parking spaces proposed, so the majority here, but a couple here, and then one for each commercial use there. So 1 space for each of the commercial units, 19 spaces for the flats, and there's a combination of 1 and 2 bed flats. So some of the flats would have no parking. Given the high street location, the recommendation is that this is acceptable, given that there's a mixture of other transport uses within walking distance. 35 cycle spaces are proposed, which is in line with the parking standard. So in terms of the access here, the access point to the site would divert slightly off. It would still allow for 2 cars to park in this area that's outside the sort of application site, as it were. What we have is a late consultation response from the council's street scene team in relation to vehicle tracking for the refuse cart. So what they inform us and what we have observed from the photos shown is that some parking does happen in this location here. The tracking diagram that the applicant has provided shows the refuse truck coming into the site, reversing down here, coming in and then having the ability to turn to go out of the site again in forward gear, but that would be prohibited if there was ad hoc parking along this turning head. So as part of the proposal, we are seeking the applicant enter into a Section 106 agreement so we can control, have a scheme of parking management to control this area here to ensure that that refuse vehicle can turn safely and exit then in forward gear. In terms of contributions, while sites of this size would usually be required to provide affordable housing on site, this is subject to viability. An appraisal has been submitted and independently tested, and the conclusion reached that no contribution could be made by this site. The recommendation, Chairman, is therefore one of approval subject to the recommended conditions, with the addition of a change to one of the conditions to update a revised location plan, and a slight change to condition 5 to require the OBS glazing in relation to the first and second floor, in relation to the flat mentioned in that condition already, with the addition of a section 106 for a parking management strategy to enable refuse collection for the site and turning. Thank you.
Thank you. We have 3 speakers on this item. Councillor Mercer first, Reading Town Council. Up to 5 minutes. Just make sure the microphone's bent forward and turned on. Sit down and...
Thank you, Chairman. Councillors. Good evening. I'm Councillor Deborah Mercer, Chairman of the Rayleigh Town Council Planning and Highways Committee, and I'm here tonight to convey the committee's objection to the application of the old Dairy Crest site. We are aware that this site has been vacant since 2014 and know that there is a need for redevelopment. What we would like to see, though, is the right development, one that is in keeping with our precious conservation area and not just an infill of as many dwellings as deemed possible. The 35 flats, 14 one-bedroom and 21 two-bedroom, together with the 2 token commercial units, are proposed behind the High Street, up a fairly narrow access road which usually has cars parked along the side. This road is the access for other commercial residential units, and there has been comment that the funeral home has had issues in the past with manoeuvrability due to these parked cars. There is no lighting, with none proposed, and is presently dark and secluded at night. There is also no pavement proposed along the access road, potentially creating a hazard for pedestrians, especially if one vehicle wants to go in and one out, and or with cars that are parked on one side as well. The access road attaches to the High Street at an extremely busy and almost permanently congested junction, with a mini roundabout and pedestrian crossings. Vehicles wanting to access it by turning right will cause even more congestion than at present, and vehicles wanting to exit the road and turn right will need to stop traffic coming from the Rayleigh Weir. This contemporary and industrial-looking flat roof development is up to 4 stories high, built with light-coloured brick, grey metal cladding and bronze windows and doors, and completely out of keeping with it being within the Rayleigh Conservation Area. It is highly visible from behind the surrounding properties, dwarfs the single-storey Eden Independent Financial Advisors, and is overbearing, dominant, imposing and detrimental to the local character and history at the top of Crown Hill, being in full view to the Grade 2 listed buildings, the Dutch Cottage and the Crown Public House, the photo of which was not shown on the slideshow but actually is in the planning application. The west of the development borders the Rayleigh Primary School playground and playing fields and could have a safeguarding issue with overlooking primary school children. There have only been 21 minimum parking standard spaces provided for the flats, 2 of which are for disabled parking. Parking standards stipulates 56 spaces plus 9 for visitors. That's 44 spaces short. They have also only provided 2 parking spaces for the commercial units, less than half the required amount. There is no affordable housing offered. If we use the 35% rule, then 12 units should be affordable, but the viability statement has indicated that this is not viable, and this is not acceptable as we feel that some should be offered. We are concerned that there will be issues with construction traffic blocking the access for the existing units and impacting on the congestion at this part of the High Street. We feel that this is an inappropriate development for the site, out of character in a conservation area, is overdevelopment and should be rejected by this committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Friend, who's the agent? Again, 5 minutes. I'll let you know when you've got a minute to go.
Okay, thank you. So I'm Glyn from Open Architecture. So thank you for the opportunity to speak in support of the application for the former Dairy Crest site. And thank you for taking the time to visit the site on Saturday the 18th. And following, obviously, your meeting, we're trying to address some of the comments and questions that were raised. We feel that this scheme offers a great opportunity to provide much-needed housing on a disused, redundant and derelict site just off of the High Street, providing much-needed 1- and 2-bedroom properties in the area, within a stone's throw of the town centre, while still providing employment opportunity on the site, in the form of 2-number commercial units. Referencing the existing architecture and materials of the site, we've progressed the scheme in consultation with Rochester District Council and Essex County Council, the proposals that have been put forward to you today. In regards to the items that we'll discuss, obviously the refuse truck and delivery trucks, it was only today that we'd had it noted that obviously the Town Council own team had reviewed that. However, when our team reviewed it and it was checked by Essex County Council, the tracking proved and the calculations proved that this was possible. With the introduction of a parking management plan, this would still be the case. In terms of the pedestrian footways, it's my client's intention to liaise with all interest parties to redevelop and resurface the access road and courtyard directly outside the proposed site, as this area at the moment is not within his ownership. The intent is to greatly improve the landscaping and do this all in one material such as block pavers or similar for both vehicular and pedestrian routes, creating a shared surface in line with the recommendations contained within the Manual for Streets. The nature of the space will naturally encourage slower vehicle movements, create an environment which pedestrians walk without feeling intimidated by motor traffic, promotes social interaction and creates safer environments for all users. In connection with this, the parking for all users of this area will be formalised and agreed to ensure all are accommodated and parking of vehicles in unapproved or unsatisfactory areas does not occur. In addressing this area and part of a landscaping proposal that would be submitted under condition, we would also look to ensure this area will be well illuminated in accordance with secured by design standards as a minimum. In regards to the overlooking, we consider that the development will create any overlooking issues to adjacent properties or the school. The boundary between the school and the proposal seek to retain the existing brickwork wall, which in this location is around 3 to 3.5 metres. The proposed building has been set back from the boundary and kept to only 3 stories in height to the north and east corners, with the section of building between these corners only being 2-storey. Added to this, it is considered that due to the times of operation for the school and the usual working day, the homes will largely be vacant during school hours. It has been provisionally agreed with Rochester District Council that windows to the flank elevation of units 5 and 6, as noted by Katie, would be obscured to omit any potential overlooking from these properties into the adjacent residential property. All other rooms face away from this actual property. In terms of the boundary treatment, in terms of the boundary to the existing area or a large proportion of the site, the southwest, northwest and northeast boundaries of the site would retain the existing 2, 3 and 3.5 metre walls. These are in good condition and will continue to provide good separation between our client's site and the adjoining owners' sites. This will help with privacy and security where needed and avoid disruption to the adjoining owners if they were to be removed and replaced. The southeastern boundary around the car park area is intended to be enclosed with steel railings painted black. This will provide a right level of security whilst allowing views into the car park from outside and also out onto the adjoining land, helping with self-surveillance and security. It is intended to landscape the inside of the railings with low-level evergreen hedging and other soft landscaping to visually enhance the public realm of the site and to increase the flora and fauna of the site, increasing biodiversity. The remaining boundary is obviously made up of the commercial units. In regards to the car parking, in an era where climate change is at the forefront, we have a responsibility where we can to try and reduce reliance and use of the private car. We've worked closely with Rochester District Council and Essex County Council through pre-application advice and during the development of the application you see today. We've been actively encouraged to reduce the amount of car parking spaces on the site, and this is justified by its town centre location. The site is located just off of a high street where local shops and services can be found. The site is within walking distance of the train station and numerous bus routes with stops on the high street or nearby roads. The site is also within distance of nearby schools, public parks and various leisure facilities. The reliance on a car when living in this development would be greatly reduced. This would be perfect for young or old alike, where the cost of owning a car can be prohibitive, but would still like to own their own home.
Okay, after Roy's in there.
Thank you
very much. Our final speaker on this item, Mr. Brown. There's an objector. When you're ready, the 5 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's still on.
Okay. Hi, I'm Russell Brown. I'm the resident at Smallfield Place, which is also called 7A. I'm going to talk about the effect this development will have on the property I live in. And first of all, and then I'm going to address the inaccuracies that have been presented. And finally, I'm going to speak about some of the planning policies which this proposal fails to adhere to. First of all, the proposed building is too close to my home. It's roughly parallel with the rear of my property, and at its closest, it's 12 metres away. The Essex Design Guide says that it's much too close. It says there should be a minimum of 25 metres between the properties. The guide goes on to say that when a new development backs onto the rear of existing housing, the new development shouldn't be closer than 15 metres from the existing boundary. Some parts of this new development are directly next to my boundary wall. Next, 3 units in the proposed building would have windows which look directly into my house. The dwellings would overlook 2 bedrooms, my kitchen and my lounge. The design guide says that upper storey living rooms of the new development should be no closer than 35 metres away. Instead, the closest of these rooms is 16 metres away. Several of the other proposed dwellings will look into the gardens of my property, which are not currently overlooked. Third, the new building will cause a significant loss of light. It should be noted that the land on my side of the wall is lower than the land on the dairy side. My house is 2 storeys high and it's built on a level lower than the dairy. The proposed design places 2 and 3 storey elements next to my southern boundary. The 3-storey part is about 10 metres high, which is nearly 3 times as high as the current wall. That wall already cuts out light to the back garden until about 10 AM in winter, so a building 3 times as high is going to significantly reduce the amount of sunlight reaching my home. As you can see, the proposed building is situated much too close to my home. It blocks out the light and produces unacceptable overlooking. Next, I want to address some of the inaccuracies presented in documents submitted to the committee. Some of those have been corrected today, but I'm going to go through them anyway. The boundary between the properties is not tree-lined. There's 3 rather sparse holly trees along a wall, which is about 45 metres long. The proposed building is presented as being only 2 storeys tall next to my southern boundary, but that isn't true. Both 2 and 3 storey elements are directly next to the boundary wall. The documents claim that overlooking issues have been eliminated. They have not. The highest of the proposed dwellings would have its windows obscured, but the units on the first floor will still be able to see over the wall and into my house. The dairy is estimated to have produced 58 vehicle trips a day, and it is therefore claimed that the new development will be unlikely to create traffic problems. However, most of the journeys from the dairy will have been carried out by electric milk floats early in the morning. Assuming not all of the 35 new dwellings are occupied by milkmen, many of the vehicle trips generated by the new building can be expected to be during rush hour, adding to the congestion and air pollution already experienced in Rayleigh. Finally, the officer's report says that the site is not in the air quality management area. That's not the case. It is in the zone. This is because part of the site is within the area, and it's made clear by the air quality management order that if any part of the property is within the zone, all of it is. The core strategy says that to protect the health of people living there, no residential development should be allowed within the air quality management area. This brings me to my final points, which are that several aspects of the proposed building fail to adhere to planning policies. There's not enough parking, there's no affordable homes, there's not enough play space, there's not enough outside area for the ground floor flats. Part of this site is in the Rayleigh Conservation Area. Therefore, much of the design is inappropriate according to the design guidelines for conservation areas. For example, the proposed design is too big, it's too tall, it uses non-traditional materials and window patterns, it has a flat roof and employs a soldier course.
Just a minute to go.
Thank you. The design doesn't reflect the character of the area, nor at 4 storeys does it match the scale. The Conservation Area Action Plan praises the dairy as being a good use of a backland site, but building a 4-storey block of mainly flats will represent a massive change in terms of character. Views into the site will be very different, as we've seen. The visuals show that the building will be visible above other existing buildings from the town centre. The change in use will also represent the loss of potential for this site. It is a large area which could be used for leisure, commercial or community facilities, uses which are supported by the Rayleigh Centre Area Action Plan. I understand the plans are able to overlook certain policies when appropriate, but should all of these policy breaches be overlooked? It's for these reasons, the loss of light, the loss of privacy, the failure to adhere to many planning policies and guidelines, that I think the proposal should be rejected. Thank you for listening to me.
All right, thank you very much. I was expecting to see a forest of hands. Right, Councillor Rowe. Well, no, if you'd like to make a start.
Actually, Chairman, I think of common courtesy, I would like to see the ward councillors speak first.
Yeah, fair enough.
Both of them are
Councillor
here.
Gray and
If I can come
Councillor
back in
Wilkinson.
after, that'd be good.
Yeah,
Thank
yeah,
you.
You're quite right.
Have spoken against this.
Could you just take your microphone a bit closer, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with many of the comments of those who have spoken against this proposal this evening. And what I've heard and seen is, in my opinion, the proposal was clearly out of character and overbearing, being in part on 3 stories. I agree that the previous speaker, that despite the provision of screening, there would remain the potential to overlook nearby residential properties, and in particular, a school playground and playing field. Based on the proposed number of units of 35, parking, in my opinion, at 21 spaces is inadequate, both in number and size. The entrance to the site via the high street appears inadequate, and this would, again, in my opinion, add to the already congested town centre traffic, particularly, Mr. Chairman, at rush hour. The site, if it is not it is adjacent to the present air quality management area and would, in my opinion, have a detrimental effect on the current area in increasing pollution. And for these reasons, as stated, Mr. Chairman, I urge the committee to refuse this application as it has been presented.
Thank you. Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you, Chairman. It's becoming, if I put my glasses on I can read what I've written. It's becoming a disturbingly regular practice, unfortunately, for ward councillors to have to attend development committees in order to defend the rights of the residents against what we perceive to be inappropriate planning applications. And it deeply saddens me that yet again, and only 1 month after the application for the overdevelopment of 41 Crown Hill in Rayleigh, here we are again with yet another overdevelopment of a site within my ward in Rayleigh, central Rayleigh. This application is to develop a site within the centre of Rayleigh Town Centre, a site which is currently derelict, and I'm personally in favour of an appropriate development of this site, as I am with any other site in our district which is currently lying empty. This application is for 35 flats and 2 commercial premises. The officer's report, on which the recommendations for approval is recorded, comes with a variety of conditions, some of which I agree and support. However, there are so many issues with this application that I know some of my colleagues sitting next to me are going to take issue with some of them, so I'm going to touch on a number of them. The one I want to talk about, well, the first one I want to talk about, Chairman, is parking, which has already been touched on, but it needs to be expanded on. A site with 35 flats only allowing 19 parking spaces, well, that leaves 17 flats without a parking space for their vehicles. So does the planning officer and does the developer really expect that they will only sell the 17 flats without parking spaces to people who do not own a car and agree never to own one? Of course they don't. So the reality is that every flat will have at least 1 vehicle attached to it. So where does the developer expect those 17 people to park? In Webster's Way and pay every day? Well, of course not. They won't do that. So in recommending this for approval, I cannot help the feeling that the planning department has totally ignored the impact on the town that 17 flat owners without suitable parking will have, and with vehicles being abandoned, as we've already seen. Rayleigh is not Southend. Southend is a metropolitan town where high-rise flats are now becoming the norm in the street scene. Rayleigh is a market town within the London commuter belt, and I, for one, do not want to see it changed because developers are allowed to routinely change the street scene, and I'm sure that residents will agree with this. According to the parking standards policy, which was adopted by full council in December 2010, and I would like to add at this point that it was not so long ago that the developer tried to suggest that this policy was adopted so long ago that it should hold little weight, but a planning inspector who adjudicated this appeal overruled them and stood by the planning department's decision. And so in their eyes, this policy still holds a lot of weight, and I can see you taking notes, Katie. That was 18/00499, which was on the recent members' bulletin. According to this policy, this development should have the following spaces provided for it: 56 spaces for residents, 9 spaces for visitors, which is a total of 65 spaces. This proposal provides 19, which is 46 fewer, or in other words, it's less than a third of what it should be providing. And in addition, the spaces, which should be 5 metres by 2.9 metres in size, are not. They're 5 metres by 2.5 metres in size. It is becoming normal now to read on officer reports the minimum parking space required is 5 metres by 2.5. That is incorrect. A parking bay of that size can only be permitted in exceptional circumstances. The minimum space is 5 metres by 2.9 metres unless exceptional circumstances can be shown to exist. And I understand that there can be relaxation of the policy, but I would question whether this is relaxation of the policy or completely ignoring the policy. And I'd like to pick up on one point which was made during the officer's presentation regarding Section 106. The Section 106 parking space. My understanding is that the spaces at the back of those units are commercially owned. There are a number of premises there. There are a number of complaints currently on the planning portal from nearby premises, and I've visited these businesses and spoken to the staff, namely Co-op Funeral Care and Eden Independent Financial Advisors. No connection, I understand, with the developer. Both of these companies have parking to the rear. The funeral business needs constant access for its vehicles. They have had problems with people ignoring the parking in their bays and illegal parking from clients at the gym upstairs. And the owner of the gym allegedly has tried to buy the spaces but has failed because he needs them. The lack of suitable parking for this development would exacerbate the issue. And I question, therefore, how that Section 106 agreement would work, because from what was being described on there, my understanding is that's where the current parking spaces are for those two companies. The entrance road is a pinch point, and everyday vehicles are parked on the curb. Even if we take a pragmatic view about this development and say the very least the developer should provide is 1 space per flat plus parking, that would equate to only 13 flats. That's 13 and not 35. And that's with just 1 space per flat, which is not what policy requires. Policy requires 2 for some of them. Chairman, if that's not evidence of massive overdevelopment of this site, then I'll be really glad if someone could point out to me what is. In addition, I'd just quickly like to take issue with 2 other points. It's already been touched on air quality. As has been quite rightly said, this development is partly within the Rayleigh Air Quality Management Area. Certainly the entrance, the only entrance to this site is. And it therefore should conform with Council Policy ENV5, which it doesn't. I also have an issue with the lack of infrastructure contribution for the development. The officer reports cites profit margins amongst the reasons for acceptable planning department for accepting this. However, this developer is in business, and in business you should take a full, informed decision rather than taking a punt. The developer should have known that there is a requirement for them, if they are constructing 35 flats, to make a financial contribution to infrastructure, along with affordable housing and the other issues that have been raised. If, having worked out the maths resulting from the purchase price of the plot, the construction costs, prospective sales prices, contributions and everything else, they can't make their usual profit margin, well then that's their lookout with respect, and I can't see what that's got to do with us. It's not for us to be bailing out developers. Chairman, I agree this site needs to be developed. I agree, but yet again this is an example, in my opinion, of a greedy, money-focused developer trying to squeeze as much out of a plot of land as they can without any regard for the local residents or planning policy. And our planning department are seeking that you approve this. I therefore implore you and your committee please to refuse this application on the grounds of overdevelopment and non-conformity with planning policy.
Thank you. Councillor Rowe.
Thank you, Chairman. I agree wholeheartedly with everything that my colleagues have said, so I'm not going to bore you with the same things again. The site clearly is dire and needs something doing to it, but as far as I'm concerned, it's overdevelopment, and let alone the access issues. Question for Katie, please.
Sorry, Councillor Rowe, it's, as visitors, it's not a to and fro. It's
sorry,
just,
could I?
Just you make your statements.
Okay.
And your speeches.
We
please.
were advised then on Saturday at the site visit that some questions were going to be asked of Essex County Council, and we would be County Highways, and we would be given an addendum for tonight's meeting I, for one, have not received an addendum. I'm not sure if my colleagues have. But, well, basically, are there answers to the questions or not?
Thank you. Councillor Mr Hoy.
Thank you, Chairman. It's not only ward councillors who are turning up tonight because of the application, it's councillors from around the district, because we are all unhappy around the way our policy is being ignored. First thing tomorrow morning, I will be writing to our AD for Place and Environment, I think it is, Mr Houghton, and I'll be also writing to our planning manager asking why we actively encouraged a reduction in parking spaces beyond our policy as stated by the agent earlier in this meeting. I will be checking the recordings to make sure the words, but those were the words used, actively encouraged, and I want to know why we are actively encouraging people not to abide by our policies. Moving on from there, parking has already been mentioned. Councillor Wilkinson has stolen my thunder because I'll normally go on about parking forever, but you're lucky tonight because I won't be. He stated it very well. Not only are there too few spaces, yet again we are going to the so-called minimum space rather than the preferred space. The minimum size space should be used exceptionally, I believe. Exceptionally is abnormally. Why? I don't know. It should be the preferred space. Another statement in here says that we're encouraging minimum space standards because it will improve the landscaping scheme, which suggests there's a problem with the landscaping as well. Moving on from that to landscaping or amenity space, shall we? It's very unclear, this report, whether or not there is sufficient amenity space. There isn't, as far as I can tell. It says there isn't enough amenity space provided because of the way it's constructed. It says that it could be made up by the use of green space at the front of the building. Well, I can't really. Our policy doesn't say there must be amenity space of 25 square metres per flat on average. It says usable amenity space, which doesn't mean a couple of trees at the front of the building. So clearly, it does not comply with our amenity space standard either. It says it's close to St George's Park. Is it close? I mean, amenity space is generally used by young people, children, and maybe by adults, but young children would have to cross two main roads, busy roads, to get to St George's Park, and it must be a quarter of a mile away, a third of a mile away at least, to St George's Park. It's not close, and that's a ridiculous statement to make. Moving on to further ridiculous statements to make regarding the parking. Sorry, I'm going around a bit. It says it is also adjacent to the Castle Road public car park when it talks about parking, and Webster's Way car park, and close to Webster's Way car park. Again, I'll get my dictionary out. Adjoining. Adjacent is adjoining or next to. It isn't. It's across a main road and through a dark alley or down the Eastwood Road and up by Marks and Spencer's. It is in no sense adjacent to that car park. So again, the report I find misleading. Then on to the size and bulk of the building. All the impressions are from a High Street, Eastwood Road area. I haven't seen any from the Crown Hill area, from the station area, from Love Lane area, where this building would dominate the skyline. As far as I can tell, it is significantly higher than the buildings currently there. The next bit is just a couple of items. It's really just one item, which is about conditions. It is mentioned in the report on page paragraph 4.5 on page 6.26 about secured for design. I know the agent again mentioned lighting within the landscaping and mentioned also secured by design, but actually the condition does not it just mentions landscaping. There's no mention of lighting as a condition, and it's clearly required by Essex Urban Places and by the police in their secured design, but our condition is missing the lighting aspect of it. Overall then, I think this is one of those developments which demonstrates that it demonstrates overdevelopment by the fact that it's not just a little bit out. There's many policies it's not applying, and by that it shows that it is overdevelopment in the area. Also, it's contrary to our policy on parking, it's contrary to our policy on amenity space, and also size and bulk. And I think on that basis the committee should consider refusing this application.
Thank you. Councillor Steptoe, you'd indicated.
Thank you, Chairman. I totally endorse what's been said before, so I won't waste time going over all that again. But there's a couple of bits that I would urge the committee to follow up on and ask questions of the officers, in particular around the 106 contributions. There doesn't appear to be anything significant with regards to education, healthcare and or roads, just as a minimum. I'm very curious to understand why, where there is no social housing, affordable housing. Yes, I'm fully aware our policy does allow for adjustment of the 35%. To my knowledge, and I would ask the committee just to verify this, and I'm sure officers will correct it if it's wrong. To my knowledge, I don't think we have accepted any planning applications with 0%. I can quote on one in Star Lane in Great Wakering where we agreed to 10%, unless there is others that I can't remember. So what is the justification for 0%? The other option, of course, with that contribution is that I think our policy does say that you can offset that by a contribution towards development somewhere else. To my knowledge, and I'd ask the committee to confirm this, to my knowledge, I don't believe we've ever actually done that.
Yeah.
There may be one or two, but I can't recall any at this stage. So, Chairman, I would urge the committee at this stage to really look at refusing this application. I suspect that the applicant it's a speculative application to see how far he can push the envelope, and I think he will leave tonight realising that he can't push it any further. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs Mason.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. I can only say that and ask that members of the Development Committee that obviously are going to hear this listened to the wide-ranging concerns of members from over the whole of the district. This isn't just Rayleigh. You've got members here speaking from East, West and Central. I'll just cover a couple of points that I think are significant. The access concerns I think you need to look at. The other concern I have, which I would ask members to raise questions of, is it would appear that they're proposing management of land that is not in the applicant's control. And I don't see how we can have a 106 agreement over land that is not in the applicant's site, but I again would leave you to determine that. But basically, I can only endorse what's been said. This is gross overdevelopment and a lack of adherence to policies, and I do hope that you will support the ward councillors and other members in considering refusal of this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Do any other of our non-members, Councillor Mrs Hoy?
First of all, I'd like to raise about you've asked for 106 money for the private land for the turning, yeah? You said 106 contribution?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Sort of thing.
Just clarify that small element.
Not a financial contribution in relation to the turning head, but a system of managing vehicle parking around that area.
Because for start that won't be in your control because it's classed as a private road. So the second point I'd like to raise is about the social housing sort of thing. We have a policy of 35%, and there's too many developers, small developers, coming through now saying, oh, we can't afford it, sort of thing. Anyone can fill in paperwork and say they can't afford something. So the only time you're going to know whether a developer has made a loss is when they sold the properties, and that's so. I think this should be refused on the basis of the affordable housing not being there. And then I'd like to point out, yet again, Essex County Council hasn't asked for any money for education. Well, as far as I know, Rayleigh Primary is full, and Swain's full, Fitz is full. So, I mean, it's yet again, Essex comes back and says they don't need any money, sort of thing. And then my last thing I want to point out about the parking, just to make it clear, it's 44 spaces that the development is short of. So that's it. Thanks very much.
Okay. Just before I open it up to members, would you like to make some comments, and particularly, if you wouldn't mind covering the highways issues, the amenity, and Section 106, and other general improvements, please?
So taking Essex County Council highways first, I did speak to them at length. We discussed their view that there is an existing access to this site. There's an adopted access to the point with the high street. As they see it, this is an existing access that served vehicle movements in relation to the Dairy Crest site, and that the proposal would introduce vehicle movements in relation to the commercial and the proposed dwellings. But in their view, the application would not have any greater impact in terms of the operational highway, because there's no proposed change to the existing access here to the highway. So they're not creating any new access points onto the highway, so we're not looking at visibility displays or anything like that. It's an existing access that could be used again tomorrow in relation to that use, although that is now redundant. That's how they see it. They're not going to change their mind. So the County Council's view is still that they raise no objection in relation to this application. What I might add is that I spoke to them in relation to, so not just this concern, but more widely, sort of this concern about is this access suitable in relation to the movement of vehicles and pedestrians, on the basis that you might take the view that this proposal introduces more pedestrians into this area than the Dairy Crest use did. You know, you've got the occupants of the flats alongside potential customers and workers in these commercial units. That is a matter for the council to decide on, whether they think this is appropriate given this change in proposal. But the County Council are not going to change their mind. Their view is still that the access doesn't change and it's an existing access point, and therefore it will not impact on in any more significant way or adversely in relation to the functioning carriageway, which is the High Street. That's all I can say in relation to Essex County Council Highways response. In relation to education, the contributions that might normally be expected from a site of this scale, well, education, we've consulted the County Council and we clarified with them, but because this doesn't meet their threshold, 50 dwellings, they are not interested in seeking a financial contribution, and there's nothing we can do about that. They have their own policy, but there we are. In relation to healthcare, it's much the same. There's a threshold at which the NHS commissioners want to look at sites and seek contributions, and they adopt a similar approach to the County Council in relation to education, and there's nothing we can do in relation to that, apart from keep raising our concern that they're not seeking such contributions, even in relation to smaller sites. There's no contribution in relation to roads because Essex County Council do not object to the proposal. So they see an existing access functioning for vehicles, they see a proposed one in much the same way, and their response is therefore no objection. And then I think there
Amenity.
was something in relation to amenity space. So yeah, the level of amenity space is set out in the report at, 3.39 on page 615. So the policy guidance allows for a combination of balcony areas and patio gardens, communal gardens. So the amenity space for the flats proposed includes to the ground floor some private amenity space to the flats at ground floor, as well as this sort of communal area here. And there's little sort of spaces of landscaping surrounding there as well. And then all of the flats are proposed with the first, second, and the ones right on the top level are proposed with the minimum balcony areas. Some of the balconies sort of greatly exceed the minimum 5 square metres. And we think in this town centre location, with some private space for each of the properties, that's acceptable in relation to that policy requirement. Was there anything else about overlooking?
Well, that'll do for the moment.
Yeah.
All right, if I move on to the members now then. Councillor Stanley.
Thank you, Chairman. It looks like there's so many holes in this, you could call it cheese. First of all, when we talk about the balconies, I'm sure that we wouldn't want to see our children play out on a balcony, even at second floor, even at first floor, or even at ground floor. Children of under 5 can be susceptible to climbing and what have you, and they'll do all they can to get out. I'm going to go on to my usual gripe about surface water and when it's pumped. And if this sewer, if it's going to be pumped into the sewer, which it doesn't say, that is a problem because, as we all know, the top of Rayleigh is a bowl. It's always been like that, and it will always hold water, and it's got to go somewhere. So if it's pumped out onto the road or anything like that, it's going to come down Crown Hill, and we can all have a canoe each and go down Crown Hill. As for what's already been said, have the officers taken notice of the boundary and its proximity to other properties? It doesn't seem as though the officers have taken anything into consideration on that. The outline of the plan, as you can see, has got red lines around it, and yet is that ground owned by the people that want to develop? I suggest not. And to get cooperation from their neighbours, I suggest they won't be doing that either. Where the ground floor is in relation to the 2 units which are commercial, it shows that the doors open onto car parking spaces. How is the occupants, should they have a problem, likely to open the door when there is a car park there? I can't see how they can do that. That's just impossible. The other thing is who is going to maintain the road, as it's not been adopted by Essex County Council and they have no problems with it. Who's going to maintain it? Potholes and such. You've obviously got manholes in the road as well, so who is maintaining those sort of things? It really is. It bears disbelief that we are going to put this in planning where so much has been said about it that I feel that and it's wasting our time. I really do think that it's getting beyond a joke that the officers are going to mitigate themselves in what our policies are for parking and everything else, and it seems to me that we're sort of hand and glove, and I don't like the idea of this. There is no amenity space for the occupants. Where are they going to put the clothes? Plus the fact there is machinery going on the roof which doesn't show, I'm afraid, which it should show, and that'll make the building even higher. It says plant is going on there. There's no lighting. It says there is no lighting on this document that's received. No lighting for the car park or that sort of thing outside of that area. I mean, it's just a joke. It really is. I'm listening to all of these, what's going on from other councillors and what have you, and it seems to me we could pull We've got holes in this like there's no tomorrows. So I would suggest, and I believe, well, I do believe, I cannot support this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor FD.
Oh, right. Actually, going to the site on Saturday left me with a few questions to ask. A few of them were answered with the presentations, but where the 106 addresses the parking management, can you just show me where they're looking at addressing the parking management on the plan, please, Katie?
Great. Just point to the parking management area that you...
So it is the whole part? Yeah, okay. Right, so that's fine if they're going to do that, if they can do that, because it's not owned by them. Again, the access, I'd ask the question, would it be adopted by highways? If it's brought up to a standard, we don't know, because again, a few different people, I think, have got past their access. Also, they're trying to encourage pedestrians with the lack of parking, but there's no pathway there. It's going to be a mixed vehicular and pedestrian pathway. I don't know how that would work. I've seen no plans on that. It just seemed to be sort of a little bit of an afterthought in his presentation. I don't know if it was or not. Is there no electric charging points going to be in there? Again, I wanted to look at the clean air, and it's part of that. So, again, that seems to be missing. And where highways have said there's not going to be no change to what happened with Dairy Crest, but that was 6 years ago. Surely the high street has changed since then. That's just a couple of things.
Okay. Councillor Cannell.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of the comments from the speakers, the members, and indeed members of the committee have actually made me chuckle with the way they were put forward this evening. However, I don't find this a laughing matter. Indeed, as a former resident on Rayleigh High Street, the entire reason I got involved with local politics was on the air quality issues and the congestion issues on that high street. I agree with the speaker when they said the action plan quotes that if part of a site is within the conservation area, the entire site is therefore in the conservation area. The air quality area. Therefore, I think it breaks our policy with regards to building materials on that matter. Our core strategy, as explained by many of the speakers already this evening, for my maths, breaks at least 4 of our core strategy policies, or an argument could be made that it breaks at least 4 of our policies surrounding parking standards, amenity space, affordable housing, and size and bulk. I appreciate that independent advice was sought on the affordable housing response, but I would seek clarity on the reasons as to why it was felt 0% affordable housing was okay for this site, if that's okay, please, Katie.
Just on this detail of clarity with regard to the air quality, can you define the line that's been suggested is the boundary for members?
Yeah. So unfortunately, I haven't got a copy of the AQMA plan to hand to show you, but generally it runs along the high street, taking in the properties that front the high street as existing. So this part of the site is in the AQMA, but the developable area isn't.
Sorry. Okay, thank you. Councillor Williams.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Along with other members of the committee, we visited this site last Saturday, and I'm going to keep this quite simple, really. I believe this to be gross overdevelopment. It doesn't adhere to any of our policies, and I would move now for refusal. Thank you.
Okay, you move for refusal.
On the grounds.
Councillor Wotton, you're wishing to second that? Or say second that? Okay.
Grounds.
Would you like to state your reasons for
overdevelopment
refusal?
And lacking it's not adhering to our policy.
Okay.
For the policy,
Thank you.
our policies in general.
Okay. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you. It was a question for the officer. Was I right in understanding that although Essex Highways had no objection to the vehicle entrance off of the high street, but you said something that they were worried about pedestrian access, and it was up to the council?
Take your mic a bit closer.
Yeah. Was I right in understanding that you said that Essex Highways were happy with the vehicle access off of the high street, but they had concerns about the pedestrian access along there, and it was for the council? Which council is it? Is it us?
So, sorry, I'll try and make myself clearer. So I had a long conversation with them and tried to understand more fully where they're coming from in terms of what are they looking at in looking at planning applications and assessing whether or not they object. And my understanding coming away from that is that they're looking at the operational carriageway, if you like. Is there going to be any impact on that from the development proposal? And is that impact acceptable or could be mitigated if it was of concern by conditions and the like? And because this development isn't seeking to alter an existing operational access that's adopted by the council onto the highway, there's no objection. I then went on to say, do their concerns extend into the site, if you like, in terms of is this site acceptable, just for instance, giving them an example, if you like, of the use of this access, perhaps you would argue involving more pedestrian usage than was previously the case in relation to the Dairy Quest use. And this access, is that suitable as it stands at the moment in relation to the pedestrian and vehicle movements going to and fro, particularly given what we know about some of the parking issues that happen here over this, what appears to be a footway, but actually is not an adopted footway by the council along this stretch. And what I understood back from them is that they still raise no objection and that these matters sort of within the site are for Rochford Council to determine, and some of our policies that have been referenced in the report do look to sort of pedestrian safety and the like in DM1, for instance, in terms of all residential developments. So that, as I understand it from County Highways, is more of your concern in terms of coming to a decision about whether this is acceptable in that regard. But in terms of the vehicular access onto the highway, the County Council is clear that they're not raising an objection, and they don't raise any specific concern themselves in relation to the pedestrian movements, because I think I understand it, that's not their main remit.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Wotton.
Thank you, Chairman. We're extremely gifted in this area to have residents, members of the Town Council, our own councillors, and people who care and are so passionate about the environment that we live in. And they speak with a rational and very objective view. They don't get excited. They back up their reasons with our own policies. And once again, we've had some commendable presentations from members across the district. This is an opportunist application. It pushes, well, it more than pushes the boundaries. It actually insults us as a committee, I believe, because we are sitting here considering something which would be obscene within our community for all sorts of reasons. On the car parking front, it doesn't just push the boundaries. We're talking about minimal spaces, minimal space sizes, accommodation which doesn't have any spaces, and as been so rightly said, there aren't adjacent areas. There are roads to cross, and the whole idea of the car parking. And what are we kidding ourselves? Parking management in this particular area, what does that actually mean? It sounds good, but it means very little. There should be parking management in the area at the moment with the toing and froing. I find Essex County Council's response wholly inadequate, and it really is just burying their head in what becomes a cumulative problem at that particular junction. It is a busy junction, it's got busier over the years, and this does nothing to help the situation at all. So I deplore the response from Essex County Council Highways. The whole building is out of character. I think people here generally would welcome some sensible development on a site. But this isn't sensible development. It's overbearing, it's inconsiderate to neighbours nearby. It contributes towards the congestion and the traffic in the area. There's ignoring of Section 106 agreements. There's ignoring of the access and the highways issues. There's ignoring of the affordability aspect. And as Councillor Hoy said, this business of actively encouraging down the number of spaces, it just seems to me totally unacceptable. Essex Police have commented within the report there is no reference to physical security in this application. As such, Essex Police would like to invite the developers to contact us. Yeah, we don't know the answer though. So for all sorts of reasons, I really deplore this application, Chair. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Councillor Eaves.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to start by apologising for not getting to the site visit on Saturday. I did, however, it was due to personal circumstances, I did, however, take the opportunity to go there later in the day, and I witnessed what I can only class as absolute mayhem round the back there. There were no parking spaces left. People were parking there. There were arguments between drivers. The concern that I have around this has been raised by a number of speakers tonight. That area of land there is not owned by the developer. They hold no leverage. If they want to get that upgraded and managed, who are they going to go to? They can't go to themselves. They're going to go to the shops and the offices that are in the front who own the land there, I would suggest. Now, if they then say, on the back of this development that they're looking to put forward, that they want the area to be developed, and they've already said it in the report where it will be done in conjunction with the owner-occupiers of the existing buildings out the front, I am guessing that they would be looking for a financial contribution. I think they'd be very hard-pressed to get that. The second thing I'd like to say is that on the conclusion of the report, much in line with what everyone has said, it actually states the scale, bulk, height and appearance of the proposed development is of a design that would not appear out of character with the surrounding context or the wider conservation area. I couldn't disagree with that more. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'll just have my little say now, and I know you've indicated, Councillor Stanley. When we come to making decisions, we do have to be very mindful of the policies that we have and the way in which we choose to interpret them, the way in which professionals interpret them, the way in which sometimes independent people will interpret them. And we have to be quite precise for everyone's benefit with what we say. I'll go first to Essex Highways. I can appreciate what they've said about the small element that they're interested in, which is just the entrance onto the highway. But once you get, I think it's about 5 or 6 metres beyond that, into the area that is not adopted highway, then the officers have suggested that a Section 106 would be sufficient to deal with the traffic management. I think that there are so many variables in this, so many different interested parties, not least of which is our own Transport Department who feel that the bin tracking the tracking for the bin lorries might not work. I feel that we do need some detail on this rather than just accepting that it's something that could be resolved in a longer discussion. So I'm not happy with that. The detail of the interaction between pedestrians. There's an entrance to a restaurant along there. There's clearly the opportunity for people going to the gym, to the residential properties. I do think we need detail, and I would be happy to support a reason for refusal that there is lack of clarity on how the safe interaction would work with parking, pedestrians, and access to necessary service vehicles. When we get on to point 3101, which is on page 6.24, we have the paragraph which talks about the reasoning for the section 106. We're stuck with Essex Education. They've got their policy. We think it's daft. They don't disagree with that. The health, they have a threshold before they start requesting contributions. I don't get that. I mean, if anyone was to ask any of us, can we think of a scheme to give you some money, we'd snap it up. But they seem to have some sort of different values. So, but with the affordable houses, that's within our control. We as a council, not the developer, we have commissioned an independent assessment, and that assessment has said on this rare occasion, and I do agree with what Councillor Steptoe said, I can't recall another occasion when there has been no request for affordable housing, but that is what the independent assessment of our commission has come up with. I would find it hard to put that as a reason for refusal based on what has been said. But should other reasons for refusal come to light, then I would as an informative that assessment needs to be revisited, and we need to take perhaps a second opinion, because to members that is clearly something that is very controversial. The point has been made about the overdevelopment, scale and height. The parking, that's quite a challenging one, because we do know, and we have many examples of town centre locations where the parking standard can be less. We've accepted that in the past, but on a relatively fresh knockdown and restart development, our preferred parking bay sizes, I don't see any reason why that should be overwritten. But in terms of the number of spaces, it is a conflict. It is a town centre location. We can assume that people will have cars, but we've also got a duty through our wider responsibilities through planning to be promoting other modes of transport. And if you haven't got anywhere to put a car in the first place, then that is going to promote bus travel. It is going to promote train travel. So it's a difficult one, but I'd be fully happy to support a reason around the physical parking sizes. And then I think we've got some more information to come about the air quality, because I think we've had a bit more of a look on the detail. So I'll come back to officers now for further detail on the air quality, because that was some detail.
So firstly, I apologise to the gentleman sat in the corner over there. We have clarified it because what's important is we get this right. This is the decision making on the night. So what we have in front of me, and unfortunately I don't have the ability to show you the outline of the air quality management area now, but it's a little unclear because the what's on the ground in terms of the outline of buildings looks a bit different to this, but part of this bit of the building that's proposed looks to me like it does form part of the air quality management area. So it's a slither, but it does mean that part of the developable site does fall within the air quality management area. So members might want to be very mindful of that. The policy does seek to restrict new residential development within that area, but the majority of the site is not within that area. Potentially there is insufficient information to judge whether the flats or part of the flats that are proposed within that bit of the site that does fall within that area are appropriate or not, given that information. We have had instances where we have accepted residential development in the AQMA further up the high street to the west because of the arrangement of fenestration, which wouldn't allow, which would essentially not face the high street, if you like, because this is where the pollution is coming from and vehicle movement surrounding there. So potentially it's lack of information around that.
I'll come back to members for a second time in a moment, but I think we have probably had the opportunity to explore all of the key issues around this. So can we start to focus down onto the motion for refusal and further comments prior to Councillor Williams restating his reason? Councillor Stanley. Councillor Stanley. Councillor Stanley first, before...
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, I'd like to point out, yes, we do need accommodation for our residents, but by getting this accommodation, and I quite agree with you by your statement, but at the same time, are we not asking those people that buy those properties, when they come to sell them, they'll sell them at a reduced rate or reduced price on their, because there is no parking. They are only able to sell to somebody that doesn't want parking. And that's not to prove that all those that want to buy, they might have vehicles belonging to their companies to use, and they've got nowhere to put them, and they won't put them in, companies won't allow them to put in car parks where not unattended. So there is somewhat of a devaluation, if you like. It's discriminatory because of not allowing, we expect people to buy property to live and to work from. Most properties are to live and to work from. Garages, car park areas, whatever. So this is really discriminative building, as I would call it, in the way of not allowing people to have the same as everybody else. Yes, I do agree that on the AQMA part, we've got just more than that shop on the corner. We've actually got the driveway into it, which they are proposing to put into their estate, if you like. So it's not just that little corner, it's all of that parking area. It's all of that driving in for vehicles and everything else. So we must be mindful of that because it shows it there in red. The line shows it in outline, and they are, the developers are making it part of their development, which should indicate to us that it is in that AQMA and not just the buildings at the back. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Right, we'll come back to you, Councillor Williams, to restate, please, your reasons for
my grounds
refusal.
for refusal would be that it's in my consideration, this would be overdevelopment of this site. It doesn't adhere, the application doesn't adhere to our policies. I have serious concerns over the security of the site and also the access to the site.
Yeah, if you'd like to.
I think we do need to sort of be precise about the reasons for refusal. From what I've heard tonight, there's been a number of concerns raised in relation to So in terms of the overdevelopment, what I think I'd need to understand is what that relates to, in which aspect of the site. So is it the scale and massing of the building in relation to neighbouring properties and the impact on amenity, or is the overdevelopment to do with the scale and mass in relation to the character of the area, or is it to do with the amount of parking that can be provided and it being inadequate in relation to the number of units that are proposed? So I think I need a bit more information about overdevelopment and a bit more detail. And also in relation to the sort of doesn't adhere to policies, we can relate the policies to the reasons for refusal, and officers can do that. But so I don't think number 2 doesn't adhere to policies. I think we need to. Can we just unpick the overdevelopment one first?
It's yes to all of those, actually.
Okay.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it would be overbearing for the area, considering the fact that it also borders onto our Dutch cottage, I believe.
Yeah. Okay. If I could.
So
go on then.
So I think from the discussions that we've had all together, I've understood that there is concern about the overdevelopment of this building in terms of the site, the amount of the site that's available for parking and the numbers.
Yes.
So does that form part of this element of, and I think we need to unpick about this parking being insufficient. Is that solely relating to the fact that new occupants of this block wouldn't have access sufficiently to car parking and might park ad hoc to the inconvenience of existing nearby residents, etc.?
Yes.
Are we also including within that an impact in terms of the loss of parking that is existing to nearby properties?
Yes.
Or is it solely to do with the...
No, it's for the whole area.
Right.
It's both, okay.
Yes. And were you happy to accept the point that I made about the preferred parking standard, the size of the bays?
More than happy, yes.
The other point that I got from members was, and I mentioned myself, was about the detail of the management of the area, not directly within the planning application, but the traffic management around that was necessary. Yes. The concerns with regard to the tracking of the refuse vehicles, yes, and detail within that.
Yeah, so I think if that's okay, the first reason for refusal relates to overdevelopment in terms of the amount of the site available given the size of the building to provide sufficient parking, which would not be sufficient for proposed occupants of the development, but also have an adverse impact on the parking of existing commercial uses.
Yes.
Got that one. Am I including, just while we're on that one, anything else in relation to overdevelopment in terms of the scale and massing of the building, or is it solely relating to the parking issue?
So we're just focusing clearly on these. So the overall bulk and height, the impact from the various directions of sight of the...
And is that relating to the impact of the character, or I know we've had concerns raised in relation to neighbouring properties, but if you have any concerns in relation to that, I think we need to be specific. If there's not concerns relating to that, we equally need to understand that.
No,
it needs to come from Councillor Wilson, who's moving this.
Thank you. That's concerns regarding for the whole area with those conditions.
The character.
The character.
Okay. Forgive me. Did you include your concerns about air quality within?
I didn't have any issues on air quality, but I don't. I can certainly have.
Well, perhaps
I don't think that's in there.
You might choose for members' satisfaction to include that within the informative, particularly around the 106.
I also
element.
have concerns regarding the air quality.
Can I go back to the... So I've got one reason for refusal around overdevelopment, and I'm sorry to labour the point, but if this goes to appeal, we do need to understand what we are trying to support the council in their reasons for refusal and what an inspector might consider. So in relation to the overdevelopment point, at the moment I've got parking in relation to parking insufficiency and the scale of the building, including the plant to the roof and the impact on the character. That's all I've got at the moment in relation to overdevelopment. I think the second reason for refusal would relate to the access.
Yeah.
So separately in relation to the access and potentially inadequacy of information to for the council to be satisfied that that access that's not in the ownership of the applicant at the moment can work satisfactorily in terms of the turning of the refuse vehicles and the control of the parking around that, and the access in terms of the pedestrian and vehicle movements adjacent to each other and the safety around that.
Along with lack of amenities and perhaps the possibility of this overlooking the school.
I think we have to be careful about some areas where we haven't had discussion, and the thing about overlooking the school is one that I think is a sensitive one, because simply being bordering onto a school is not a problem. There are hundreds of thousands of properties up and down the country that do that. It's people that cause a problem with schools, and I think we have to be careful about just throwing out comments because we think we need to ensure that what we're saying is able to be substantiated.
My main concerns are overdevelopment for this site.
Okay. Councillor Stanley, you just want to assist Councillor Wilson? Councillor Williams, sorry again.
Insufficient community space that is only available at the ground floor and not the second or third.
Right, okay. Obviously you're aware that goes against the officer's advice and analysis of the application.
Sorry, I didn't catch that. Can you explain what the comment was? That just.
It was about a lack of amenity space.
Okay.
I think we had concerns in the report, in the application, that suggested that the amenity space available was for the town centre location was not close enough. Yeah. Given the nature.
Is the concern about the amenity space for the proposed flats being incorporated into the overdevelopment reason for refusal or not?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
So I've got two reasons for refusal at the moment.
Right.
I've got one overdevelopment one and one related to the access vehicle pedestrian movements. I know we can put the policies relating to those, but there was something about security that I didn't.
There was within the report reference that the standard of design would be based on the secured by design standard from Essex Police on 627, but we didn't. I believe members didn't feel that they had sufficient detail in the application to see that was actually happening.
So what I would perhaps suggest is that's an informative that would be put on to say that, in any subsequent application, what you'd want to see is that, that's been given full consideration into the...
The other two items were, because we wouldn't like to sign these elements off as being acceptable, was the 106 and a second opinion on that.
Is that going on as an informative?
Informative, because there is a formal...
So the informative would state that any subsequent application...
I think that's a piece of work that we also need
for
to do as a
ourselves,
council.
if you like. So we would just... It's a
and
note,
the air quality issue and the precise clarity of adjoining part of the site is perhaps more fully explored.
Is that an informative or is that a reason for refusal? If that's a reason for refusal about insufficient information regarding the part of the site being in the air quality management area.
Lack of information.
Yeah.
Councillor Button, you'd like to help Councillor Williams with his reasons for refusal?
Chairman, as I said earlier, we've listened to a number of very good speakers tonight, some that form part of the committee and some that don't, but nevertheless they came up with well-reasoned points in relation to our policies.
But you need to make the...
Could I suggest that the tape is listened back, because we were broadly supportive of those...
We were, but as members of the committee, it is for you to put forward the reasons for refusal. That's quite clear. Councillor Stanley.
Thank you, Chairman. Also, close proximity to other properties where we have our own legislation on close proximity to other buildings.
Okay. Can I just clarify?
Yeah.
So can I go back to the layout plan, please? I know we have heard concerns from one resident in particular, and we've had some discussion from various members about the impact in terms of residential amenity. I need to understand, I think, in terms of the reason for refusal, which parts of the site you're concerned with. So, for instance, is it this part of the site and you're concerned with the impact in terms of amenity and the proximity to boundaries? There's a car park here, for instance, so I sort of assume there's no concern in relation to that here. Property 7A is here with its residential garden, and we've heard the concerns raised from the occupant of that property in relation to the proximity to this boundary, given the scale of the development. I think we just
Councillor Stanley.
I would say proximity to property
7A, yeah.
Councillor Williams, is that acceptable for you?
That's acceptable, yes, thank you.
And its height overlooking the property garden, especially as it's an amenity for that property, where it would be more dense than what it naturally is.
Okay.
Right, members, without prejudging what you're about to determine, I think it's fairly clear the direction in which this has gone. We've had a full discussion. We have a motion for refusal, which has been put forward and seconded. We have a series of reasons for refusal, which are clearly understood by officers. Does any member need to have those reasons for refusal restated so they're clear about what they're going to be asked to vote on? Okay. Right. To the vote then. Those members in favour of the refusal, please indicate. Thank you. That item is refused. We now move on to item 7, which is land to the east of the Rugby Club, Aviation Way, Rochford.
Proximity to neighbouring town. They got it on the end, yeah.
Chairman, if I may, I'd like to, I have a non-pecuniary interest being a ward councillor for this one.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh.
Same reason, Chairman, being the ward councillor.
Okay, thank you very much. Right. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. Good evening, members. Right, this is a reserve matters application in respect of landscaping only. It is not a planning application, but merely an application for further approval of reserve matters, further to the granting of previous reserve matters under planning reference 1800584 REM, which dealt with issues of siting, external appearance, layout and access, and landscaping. So we're not revisiting issues of siting, external appearance, layout and access, and we are revisiting for a second time issues of landscaping only. The original application in terms of the outline permission was planning reference 1500781 OUT, which is the outline, which granted approval for the principle of B1 and B2 use on the wider site, which is in connection with the joint area action plan at Aviation Way. Can I just have this? Thank you. So the site area in question is consistent with the previous application, the 1800584 REM. The entire site is edged in red here, if I recall, was about 2.4 hectares, which is about 24,000 square metres. The application in this instance has sort of three main elements associated with the landscaping scheme. Those elements are land level changes, the actual landscaping itself, and enhanced boundary treatments. So just to give members an outline, this is Aviation Way along here. This is Unit 16 to 17, Unit 18 to 19, and Unit 20 to 21. In terms of, this is north. So basically, the site broadly is 190 metres in length along here, 200 metres in length along its west boundary, 200 metres in length along its southern boundary, and it is 143 metres in length along its east boundary. If you can move on to the next slide, please. So in terms of this layout here, shows the substantive reserve matters that has been approved under the approval, the 1800584 REM. So this element here is unchanged, as is really the actual extent and location of the landscape buffer. The main changes are in this area around here, which we'll show you from the photographs. So broadly, the area that has been subject to changes in land levels is broadly 7,200 square metres as compared to the overall site area of 24,000 square metres. So we're only talking about land level changes mainly along this part of the site. Fundamentally, the question is why then? So there's a slight fall in land levels from west to east and from northwest to southeast. And basically the works have been undertaken. It'd be helpful to members perhaps if we moved on to show a photograph, which is quite helpful, which is the next slide, or the slide 4. Yeah, there we go. So, although not entirely in this white area, so what we have here is that the main land level changes are along a 97 metre length along this southern boundary here. But as the report also mentions, there are land level changes to a length of 22 metres broadly along the east. So basically, it's to create a level site which wasn't appreciated at the time the original reserve matters was submitted. And there are a number of reasons for obviously requiring a level site, which is to ensure that there's vertical alignment with the spine road. If we perhaps moved on to one of the pictures, if we look, there's one of a spine road. If we just move on through the pictures, perhaps. It doesn't matter, we go back, but that's fine. So basically, under a separate reserve matters application, a spine road serving part of a site had been approved. And therefore, to get vertical alignment with the spine road, here we are, the spine road here, which is to the west of the site. So currently then, the building is substantially complete in terms of its shell. So we're looking at the site. We'll progress with each photograph that will be shown through in an easterly direction. But the main reasons, if we can just stop there for a moment, the main reasons then for the levelling of the land is because obviously the land does need to be level, which facilitates vertical alignment with a spine road to get a level area. Because from a previous plan showed, what you have to the south of the actual building itself, which is about 13,000 square metres, is that the site does need to be level, and also to facilitate drainage of surface water off that surface yard back in a northerly direction, in the direction of the building, And also the third reason is to facilitate an integrated landscaping scheme. So the land falls from west to east, therefore. So if we can, we'll just take you through. So basically, this photograph, there's a series of photographs now, and I think photographs speaks volumes. So this 97-metre length of strip, generally, just to explain to members that the width of this area to the rear of particularly 18 and 19 Aviation Way, and to a lesser degree 20 and 21 Aviation Way, the actual width of that strip to the boundary is 3.5 metres. The area here has been raised, and I'm going to show you eventually some section drawings. So if we just move in, turn through the drawings, if we can. Yeah, if we go back to section drawing 1. Okay. So basically, what these section drawings show is, sorry, just explain to members, this section here is a very telling section. So this is a section looking east to west. So it's a transverse section looking across the 97-metre line where the land levels have been changed. So the green dotted line shows the existing or the pre-work land levels, and the solid black line shows the actual land levels as they have been undertaken. So this here is the actual site boundary. So one can appreciate that actually what's actually taking place is that currently from the site boundary, the green dashed line does show an actual bund at the moment, which is the green dotted line. So fundamentally, the works that have not taken place yet is the scraping of this bund on the southern side of the raised land level. And at this point here, there's going to be a concrete retaining wall, which are works yet to be undertaken, which is going to be partly in the ground, sitting on a plinth, on a concrete plinth. So the actual vertical height of this concrete retaining wall, which is roughly located over 3 metres from the site boundary, the vertical height of this wall is going to be 1 metre. And basically, this is the most telling section drawing, which is a representation along the longitudinal plane, looking at it transverse. So the main differential is that the land is actually built up beyond the line of the proposed location of the retaining wall, coming up at an angle, because it needs to basically fill in this area here. So this is the area looking east. So fundamentally, it's just filling in that area where there was a fall in the land. And the officer report does indicate that although it's not, this is a representation through the longitudinal line, the highest differential in land level is actually 1.5 metres, which is indicated by that section drawing. And this here is a shot looking in the other direction. So these are just section drawings showing you the representations through the site. If you move on to the next drawing. Right. What this actually shows, and it's important to emphasise, is as the land falls from west to east, the actual datum point for the highest part of the building is no higher than the previously identified datum point in the 584 REM application. But as there's a gradual fall in the land, there is a slight makeup of land levels here, but actually it doesn't result in a higher building, and it's quite important to emphasise that. So perhaps we'll just go through some of the photographs now, which will help us to consider and conclude on some of the main issues. If we just go through each one by one. There we go. If we could keep. So, yeah, I'd like to show members. So basically, in terms of the land level changes, this is at the rear of 18 to 19 Aviation Way. It's rather dark, this picture, but basically that is, this area here actually represents what is the highest point then. So just to confirm that the land levels as you see them at this highest point will get no higher. And the one thing to emphasise as well is that the highest land level relative to that green dotted line that you saw at its highest point, the greatest differential is no more than 300 millimetres relative to the top of the bund that was shown on that previous section drawing, where it was denoted by the green dotted line. So if you just go through the photographs, please. This actual, if you go back one, please. So just to show you the photographs, then we'll go on to just the main points in the appraisal. But I just want to show members this. So this is a shot of the rear of 18 and 19 Aviation Way, just to show you the arrangements at the rear of this premises. So there are windows looking out towards the site, and there's what can be described as a conservatory structure here. If you just move on to the next one, please. This is an image looking from west to east and along the rear of 18 to 19 Aviation Way. So you can appreciate the physical sort of relationship between this building and this changed land level here. Just go on through the next one, please. This is an image. What basically emerges from observations on site is, so this is the westerly extremity of 18 and 19 Aviation Way, looking towards number 16 and 17 Aviation Way. So as we move along the site boundary to the west, the actual level differentiation basically peters out. It becomes indiscernible almost. So that coincides with that whole concept of the land sort of drops away from west to east in this direction. Can I have the next photograph, please? This is quite a useful shot. This shot is taken of the building, and this image is taken at the east extremity of 16 to 17 Aviation Way, looking through. So the land level, bearing in mind, members, that there was an existing bund here anyway, it's just this is where the differentiation starts to occur, which basically coincides with that first image I showed members in terms of that very white, hard, compacted area. So it's coterminous with that. If we can just move on again, please, Katie. And this is just to give members a clearer image of this change. So just to explain in what was explained in the section drawing, basically at this point here, this is the bund that will be scraped away. So the actual retaining wall will be along here. So the 1 metre vertical concrete wall will be at this point here. And this area from here to here will be scraped away to give that vertical wall emphasis. If we move on again, please, Katie. And this is an image taken right at the bottom end of 18 to 19 Aviation Way, which is, this is the building. And this is the east boundary of the site. So again, when one stands here, there is an element of an embankment there to the same height as what's shown broadly along the southern boundary. We're going to come to some main points, but if we can just finish the photographs, please. That's the last one. Okay. Right, so just the main issue. So members have had an opportunity to consider that. There's one on landscaping there somewhere as well, Katie. Landscaping plan. We've got landscaping plan. Okay. And there's yeah, if you can show that. So that's in terms of the outline of the land level changes. Members will note that the second aspect was the landscaping. So what I will explain to members is that all I can conclude is, from the landscaping perspective, what we have here, we have a swale here, which is an area of ground which was designed as part of the outline phase in terms of the infrastructure strategy. There's going to be a swale here where water will drain into this area. So in terms of the extent of the actual landscaping buffer strip, and it's mentioned in the report, so what we have here is a mixture of sort of native shrub plants. This here is just showing the extent of the boundary wall, which is in this area here. So it's only over a part of half of the length of the southern boundary where the actual wall will be erected. So in terms of comparing the appropriateness of a landscaping element of the planting itself, this is actually very similar to the previous plan that was approved under the 1800584 REM application, and it's in line with the broad principle set out at outline stage. So in terms of a landscaping and the design element of landscaping, it's concluded that the application is satisfactory. And then the enhanced boundary treatments, well, that was shown really on the section drawing, which really is the retaining wall. And then we have a shot of, we've got a perimeter fencing detail somewhere. Perimeter fence. Yeah. And basically, members will note from the report that the Paladin fence is basically a high tensile steel mesh boundary. And this fence will sit actually at 0.5 metres further into the site at the height of the retaining wall. So it will extend at a height set back 0.5 metres further into the service yard on the northern side of the boundary. So just to conclude a few issues then, so we're clear that the part of this application does seek retrospective permission for the remaining works that are to be undertaken, which is the scraping of the bund to create that level area to the base of the wall on the southern side. It includes the erection of the Paladin fence, which is pretty much along the south, southeast and west boundaries, and then the buffer planting. So given the narrow scope of the application, it's my recommendation that the reserve matters be approved subject to the 3 conditions as outlined in the officer report.
Thank you. 2 speakers on this one. Is it Mr. Ryan? If you'd like to go first, as you're already there. It's all right. 5 minutes, we'll let you know when you've got a minute to go.
Okay. Evening. I'd like to point out that I'm the freeholder to 16 to 17, 18 to 19, 19 to 21 of Aviation Way. I've owned the property for 23 years, and the bund was put there between me and the farmer some years ago. The bund was only about 600 millimetres high, about 2 feet in our language. The bund obviously didn't come up above my window, so it didn't cause any problem. The land used to be level. There is a photograph, for some reason they haven't put it up there, as when I bought the property, the land was level with the fields at the rear. Now the bund is now 7 feet high. So you're being misled by your planners. It's actually 1.5 metres too high to what was originally approved, which is 5 feet. The bund was roughly 2 feet, so we're 7 feet. So we're up to nearly 3/4 way up the top of our windows. So I've lost one tenant already due to the noise, because obviously there's a lot of banging and crashing going on there. And when you've got a height, you should really have some kind of acoustic fencing. It's cut the light out. The lights are on now all day long. Electricity comes from the airport, so we pay twice the price anyone else does for electricity. We have no choice in that one. There's no drainage where our land used to drain onto the land next door, and now it can't because of the levels of the ground. They say they're going to put retaining wall up. They can't build the retaining wall without going to my land to build it. So I'd like to know how they're going to build it from that bank downwards. And secondly, they've shown no drainage on the bottom of the retaining wall. So once again, where is our water going to drain where it used to drain before? It can't drain on the site because there's going to be a retaining wall there. So I'm just at a gasp. What I'd like really is for members, if possible, to have a site visit so they could see for themselves and appreciate the impact caused by this 1.5 metre increase in the ground levels. Also, they can see the historic pillbox now, which you can only see the roof now, which before you could see the pillbox. The plans were approved are misleading. They show land between us and the new IPCO building being level. That's what was originally approved. They were wrong in the first place. It was me who pointed it out to the council in July. I actually got my own engineer to check the levels, to prove the levels were wrong. Up to that time, your planning department didn't even know they were wrong. So that's worrying, isn't it, really? These are the people that are advising you. Right, originally this area of land was to be a car park, which was approved originally, and then it was changed to a service yard. The car park was 450 millimetres lower and could have had a slope on it. Because it's a service yard, it needs to be level so that it can go into the back, so the lorries can go into the back of the building at a level platform with the ground, with the inside slab. I'm not against any development. In fact, I also own the land on the opposite side in Cherry Orchard Brickwork. So I'm for the development. What I'm concerned about is that we seem to be roughshod over our the existing tenants. It's caused major problems with us, and Southend Council seem to be able to do whatever they like, and Rochford just back them up. I really would like the members to come and have a look for their own sake, so they can make an opinion based on facts rather than the fiction you're getting from your planning. I have 2 tenants that complained in writing. One of them tenants have moved out. I have taken legal advice, and my solicitors are waiting to start action if necessary. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Diamond, if you wouldn't mind going back to the side for our next
Yes,
speaker.
sorry,
Thank you. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Nick Diamond. I'm a planning partner at Knight Frank. The application before you follows extensive discussions with your officers, and we welcome their conclusions that the proposed works would not result in any demonstrable harm to any development plan interests, the character and appearance of the area, nor amenity of neighbouring commercial units, and that it permits drainage to be dealt with entirely within our client's site with no surface water runoff to the adjoining land to the south, a position that has been confirmed by both officers and Kent County Council. Members should also, when looking at this application, obviously consider the merits of the application before them, and if they are satisfied, approve the application. By way of background, and as pointed out by your officers, outline planning was granted for the entire site back in 2015, and a reserve matters application dealing with the appearance and scale of the building which occupies the site and will, as has been said previously, be occupied by a PICO, along with the car parking and servicing, was approved in 2018. The application before you seeks a further reserve matters approval to landscaping details, including changes to levels which were not in the previous reserve matters application. Access arrangements, scale, layout and appearance of the development remain as previously approved under the 2018 Reserve Matters application. The Reserve Matters application, if approved, would sit alongside the previous Reserve Matters permission, and there is nothing that prevents there being a number of Reserve Matters applications coming forward, especially on large and complex sites such as this. I would respectfully request that you follow your officer's recommendation and approve the planning application, thereby enabling delivery of the first phase of development as conceived by your joint area action plan, and ensuring that the provision of a modern accommodation for a significant long-standing local employer is delivered. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Steptoe.
Thank you, Chair. I just ought to clarify, not only am I county councillor for this area, I'm also the ward councillor for this area as well. Just to clarify. Is it possible that I could have the picture up of the landscaping where it had the swale on it as well, please? That's it. Okay. The water, I think the officer said, and I'd asked the committee to question this, runs from left to right across this drawing, in other words, west to east. It doesn't show where it ends up, and I'd like to know perhaps where the water does end up into. Secondly, when this was a greenfield site, obviously the drainage from the adjacent property in Aviation Way would have run into the fields and simply soaked away. I'd like to ask the committee to find out what mitigation has been put in place as part of this to alleviate that particular problem. Was there any data taken previous to the it being done, as we would on any other development site? I'm assuming that also this is a retrospective application, which I find a little strange considering who's doing development. And I think that just about covers everything that I've got a concern with, but mainly how is that water that's running from south to north onto what was the original field being dealt with and in terms of mitigation. Perhaps the planning committee can get those points clarified for me.
Okay. No more of our non-members. Councillor Stanley, you'd indicated first. Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman. In respect of what's just been said, and I quite acknowledge that that was part of parcel of my asking the officer, but at the same time, with the bung that was approximately 600 mil, and now it's much higher, this is obviously a conflict to the adjoining premises, where they're looking at the bung instead of looking across away from it, and this is quite a high level, plus the fact that along with this, it's going to be used as a lorry park, car park, whatever that may be. This is really sort of, again, this, I'll call it CO2, whatever you like to call it, nitrous oxides, whatever, coming off of that parking area from diesel fumes and what have you. How can premises actually survive if that is the case? You know, I mean, this is again another you put one building up at the detriment of somebody else which has already got a building there and it's occupied, and he's likely to lose the revenue from it, and also the labour or the employment, if you like, to that premises. The other thing is the where we got the swale, if you like, how is that being discharged, and is the water that's the other side of that bung, because now it can't fall into that swale or that area, where is that going? We all know that the reason that the bung was there was to either A, stop flooding into the premises adjacent to it, but there doesn't seem to be anything done in respect of that property the other side. Plus the fact, is the wall going to be built on the property of the ownership to that site and not on the ownership to what the gentleman has just said he owns? And quite frankly, to remove that and just put a concrete pillar in there, who is going to maintain that? As we all know, that the concrete will gradually rot away because of corrosion by the soil. Clay is one really bad thing that really rots concrete very, very quickly. Who is going to maintain that area as well? Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah, just remind everyone we're on a particularly narrow item of a planning application here. I think just to help members along, we've got a valid application on this site. This is a variation on reserved matters. Could I just ask you to give a little bit more detail on the impact of the surface water drainage compared to what we've previously agreed?
Well, I have to respond by saying initially that given that this is to deal with landscaping, we are simply not dealing with surface water drainage as a matter of consideration this evening, because it's landscaping, and landscaping is defined in the Planning Acts as a very narrow scope. It does not involve surface water drainage. However,
just the impact on it. Yeah.
Officers recognised that in raising land levels, we have to be satisfied that the narrow scope of this application does not affect the ability of the application subject to the previous outline permission 15007881 outline at condition 22 stated that in connection with each development of each parcel that came forward under each separate reserve matters application, that the surface water drainage in respect of each parcel had to be resolved, but that is a resolution to be found under condition 22 of the outline planning consent. However, when we received this application, which cited site level changes, officers were immediately alert to the potential that the requirements required under a separate planning consent may not be achieved because of these site level changes. So to answer the question in terms of, although it is actual material fact that we are not looking at surface water drainage this evening, the reason I've brought this plan along is because officers had a meeting with the developer and Essex Suds in Chelmsford a while ago. And we were looking at this issue of raised land levels as it related to, did it affect the fundamental delivery of the surface water drainage mechanisms that are required under a separate condition, under a separate planning consent. How things have evolved from that is that Essex Suds are satisfied that these land level changes fundamentally do not affect the delivery of surface water drainage. The reason for showing that plan is that in terms of how the run would work, members will note that I did present in the presentation earlier on that one of the objectives of the getting the site level was, the second objective was to achieve surface water runoff off the service yard. So there's a number of things that have been confirmed there, that along these levels here, what this plan shows, which isn't necessarily submitted in connection with this application, I have to emphasise, but it's submitted in relation to details relating to condition 22, discharge of condition 22 of the outline relating to the surface water drainage details of this parcel of land. So what these spot levels actually show then, and as the section drawings that were shown, the land basically is at its highest point here, and it drops back in the direction of the building. So the whole idea is that when it rains heavily, water will actually will be draining from this area to this area here, and although very complicated, the issues in terms of the drainage swale, they are subject of separate consideration under condition 22 of the outline, which SUDS have confirmed is acceptable. And the fundamentally what we need to be looking at is, what are the implications for surface water drainage, and that's in the report, as a result of this narrow scope of this consideration. And the answer is that there is no implication for surface water drainage. I would just like to add one more thing, is that the developer has confirmed in writing with the council that actually there is no drainage obviously coming from the site in the direction of the southern boundary.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Shaw.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to recommend that we defer this application and members have a site visit. Then we'd be able to see a bit more what is being said. It'll be a lot clearer.
I personally feel that we have got everything that we need in the way of information to support us making a decision tonight on a very narrow focused application, and we clearly have all the detail about very specific height levels available to us. I think it would be unfair, and members have obviously had the opportunity to call a site visit in advance of this if they felt it was appropriate. So I must admit, I'm not supportive of that person at the moment. Councillor Efty.
Can you go back to this cross-section slide that showed the difference in ground levels between what was and what's now proposed, please? Right, with the middle picture where the green line is, where the green line used to come up on the south border, used to come right to where the shell wall is going to be. A little bit to there, yeah? Where the old site, there was the new ground level, looks like it's going to be a greater fall going towards the south than there was originally. What's the, I know we're not really supposed to talk about groundwater and stuff like that, but that's not going towards the building, that is going towards the south boundary, and that is a lot bigger than what it was. Do we know what impact that will have?
Yes, I didn't cover that in my presentation, but I've already covered it in my presentation, that you've got a vertical 1 metre wall here where this existing bund has been scraped away, so it leaves you with a vertical emphasis of 1 metre.
Yeah.
And this is on the southern boundary, so 18 to 19 Aviation Way is on this side of the boundary. So the land then slopes up beyond the wall to a point about 4 metres from the wall to this highest point, which is where the greatest differential in land level is, as looking at the site from the east.
So what I'm getting at is you've now got a 4 metre drop towards the south, where before you never had...
No,
well, the
that's
green line had no
incorrect.
drop
You have a
at all.
1 metre drop from the top of the wall to the bottom of the scrape. 1 metre, not 4 metres.
No, we're showing where the highest point is. Is a 4 metres. It's 4 metres. The highest point is 4 metres from the south boundary. Is that correct?
No.
No. So what am I
That's
getting
incorrect.
wrong? What am I not understanding?
I've explained everything I can explain to members. I'm sorry, Chairman, but...
Maybe L to assist. The green dashed line, which is perhaps somewhat difficult to see on the background of this sort of mustard colour, but the green dashed line shows the level prior to some of these works having taken place to increase the land level. Yeah?
Yeah.
So from this point here, the lowest level of the green line, as was, to the highest point that it's been raised,
Yeah.
this plan indicates that that distance is 1.5 metres, and that's the highest differential from the existing to the what is now.
Yes, it's raised 1.5 metres.
At this point here,
Yeah,
and
that's
this
the
is
highest
section BB, which is this here. So
Yeah.
this point here is right on the boundary, and then this point here is just slightly, 4 metres into the site. This area here, if you're concerned with this here,
Yes, that's what I'm concerned
so
with.
in terms of the slight increase in the slope, if you like, upwards or downwards towards the southern boundary, this area is the bit that's going to be landscaped, so soft landscaping on there. So we haven't got the landscaping plan on a layout, but that's the bit there'll be soft landscape between can't pronounce it, but the fence that will go up just on top of the retaining wall, and then you'll have a strip here which has soft landscaping in it, and that goes along this boundary here.
So that's soft
This dark line here is the service yard.
Right, so that soft landscaping will drain down into the swale. Yeah.
And it will be soft, if you like, so the surface essentially will take some of the surface water.
Sorry, I'm just going to add. Here, so this moving the plan about. So, sorry. Yeah. So this part here is where the highest point is. The 1.5 metre is along here, and then as it moves back towards the service yard, it peters out to about 30 centimetres difference. Any surface water runoff that actually doesn't run back to the building will actually run along the retaining wall. That's the purpose of one of the reasons why the retaining wall was actually put in, and then run back towards the swale or out here to pick up the existing surface water drainage.
Okay. Councillor Canal.
I understand that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to clarify how this came to our attention and the retrospective nature of it. Were there any reasons given as to why this was retrospective?
I think we need to focus on whether we agree with this rather than the reasons behind it. It's just to focus on the application as it stands.
Full due respect, is the retrospective nature of it not a material matter?
No.
Thank you for clarifying that, Chair.
Councillor Reeves.
Thank you, Chair. Being mindful of your direction to members that we had the opportunity to call in a site meeting before, I think that it is a valid thing to actually ask for deferment for a site visit purely and simply for the reason that we seem to have conflicting information coming from the adjoining people from as was explained to us tonight, compared to what has actually physically been presented to us tonight. And that a site visit would clarify that.
Mr. Dunn.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, it is acknowledged in the officer's report that there is an impact with regards to how the site levels are now in conjunction and with the adjoining landowner. The officer, I mean, obviously we did take that into consideration. That's why we have a additional reserve matters application before the committee tonight. The officer has spoken in his report that we've taken the impact on the neighbouring amenity into consideration. Members should be mindful that we are talking about two business developments here. And obviously, although there is a level of amenity, it's not the level of amenity that would be expected if it was a residential development that was nearby. The adjoining landowner mentions about impact on light, but this is light to, a commercial premises. And we considered that the actual distance between the back of their premises and actually where this raised land levels are isn't material to have such a negative impact on that amenity that they should be expected to enjoy.
Okay, Councillor Stanley, you wanted to come back?
If I may, please, Chairman. From my understanding from the senior planner, there is only one concrete wall. Could you indicate that to me, please?
It's along this is basically this. It's along this length here, so this annotation shows the wall will extend 97 metres from the south-east boundary along the boundary to this point here, where it will no longer be required.
Can I just turn around and say then that I've just been told by the planning officer that the concrete wall is that side of the green and not this side of the green that's been indicated by your senior planner. Who is right and who is wrong?
I'm sorry,
Yes,
I'm sorry, Chair.
You distinctively turned around and said that there is a concrete wall running along the inner edge. And
just let the officers clarify.
Yeah, I want it clarified, please.
With the line.
The concrete wall is inside the applicant's boundary. It's not even on third-party land, obviously, because the notice would have been served. So this here, this doesn't actually show where the wall is. This is an annotation, an arrow, showing where the wall is inside the actual site boundary.
That's what I was taken to believe, yes. So what
Well, that's
the reason
fact.
that
That's
I'm
fact.
asking, the reason that I'm asking is the bung that was originally there, is it the developer's property or is it the property of the adjoining business? And if that is the case, then they will have to cut their car park down or lorry park to make sure that that bung...
Can we just focus on the narrow application that's in front of it? I need to just temporarily halt proceedings a minute. Our meetings go 2.5 hours and this one finishes at 10 o'clock, unless the majority of you will agree that we continue the meeting. Members, we have one more application in front of us as well for Mrs. Mason. Councillor Mrs. Mason has been waiting quite patiently. The members, I'll move that we continue the meeting till complete, because I don't anticipate the next one being a huge length of time. The members happy to continue the meeting? Great. Okay. Right. Just for clarity, Councillor Shaw, you indicated that you would prefer this item to be deferred pending a site visit. I think Councillor FD indicated that he seconded. Obviously, I expressed my view, but I think given where we are and the slight impasse, we'll take a vote on your motion for deferral. Does anyone else wish to speak on that motion for deferral? No. Right, those members in favour of deferring this item, subject to a site visit, please indicate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Those against? The item is deferred pending a site visit. Sorry about that. Right, moving on. Item 8, Gustard Hall Farm, Gustard Hall Lane, Hawkwell. Go, quickly.
Yeah. Sorry, just get the first one up, Katie. Just the location plan, please.
Jennings.
Just the location plan, thank you. Yeah, that's fine. Members, so this application is for the change of use of some existing poultry sheds. The site is located to the south of Main Road, close to the junction with Gustard Hall Lane. If I can take you to the next plan, please. So this shows you the wider context. So this is the site here and the existing poultry sheds that are not used for that purpose any longer. This is Gustard Hall Lane running up to some residential properties here, but surrounding is largely sort of farmland, open land, undeveloped to the south, west and partly the northern boundary. There is an existing residential property close by under the same ownership, and then there's a Potash Garden Centre to the east and some existing residential properties along Main Road. If I can take you to the existing plans, please. The proposal is for the conversion of the 4 existing poultry sheds, so they're the 4 floor plans there. Only very small changes proposed to the external appearance of these units. So this is the what was, should I say, the it shows existing pattern of fenestration, so doors and openings to the building. And if I take you to the proposed plans, what you'll see is that they're very similar, but what they want on the frontage is roller shutter doors to each of the 4 units. The facing material is also proposed to be updated. You'll see some photos shortly. As I said, the proposed changes to the building are minimal. Parking will be provided to, if I can take you to the location plan, to one side of one of the buildings and then a couple of spaces here. There's an existing an in and out access to the site frontage, and this is all hard surfaced. That there's no change proposed in relation to that. The council's development plan allows for the conversion of existing buildings in the Greenbelt subject to policy DM13, and it's set out in the report the requirements of this policy. The existing building is of permanent and substantial construction, which is the first prerequisite of this policy. The building would not be extended at all. If I can take you to the photos just briefly. Just scroll down, please. Sorry, the first 2, they're all in one document. I couldn't change that. If you can just scroll down. So this is the access from Main Road. That's an existing point of access to the highway. If you could scroll down again, please, until you find an image of the changes that have happened to the building. You'll see the change in the facing material. So there you go. So during the course of the application having been submitted, when the officer dealing with the application visited the site, it was noted that some of the proposed works had taken place, and it's understood that the site now is occupied by a B8 user. The second requirement relating to the Greenbelt is that the proposed use would not have any greater impact in terms of vehicle movements associated with it. Obviously, there were vehicle movements associated with this site in relation to the poultry use, and the officer recommendation states that this use, the B8 storage and distribution use, would have no greater impact on the character or appearance of the Greenbelt. The application, therefore, Chairman, is for approval, subject to the recommended conditions. No neighbour objections have been received, and there is no objection from the County Highway Officer. Thank you.
One presentation, Mrs Jennings.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm Kate Jennings from Well As You're Not, representing the applicant Rankin Farms Limited. As the planning officer has covered quite concisely, the proposal is policy compliant for the reuse of an existing rural building within the Greenbelt. Until the site was recently sold by the poultry company, it was operated as a poultry rearing site, which had traffic, noise and smells associated with it. The proposed use is a storage use. At the time the application was submitted, the site was not in use. However, since that time, the landowner has secured interest from a suitable tenant and took to start replacing some of the works as shown in the photographs, and a lease has been secured. The company is a logistics company that's using the site as a storage facility. Deliveries will be made to and from the site, but the site is for storage only. There is no retail, wholesale, and the current conditions proposed by the planners ensure that this is the case. The level of traffic is not significantly different from the previous agricultural activity at this site, and as such the adjacent highway would not be detrimentally affected. I think it's quite underestimated the amount of movements to and from poultry sheds with feed and clearing birds in and out of the shed, so there was a high level of movement in and out of this site. The fact that the company have sold and moved out there has been a quiet period. It is noted that Highways have not objected to this proposal. The proposed hours of operation are accepted by the applicant and landscaping can be provided as agreed with the council. The proposal is supported by both national and dual local planning policy and has received no objections from local residents or statutory consultees, and I would urge councillors to support the officer's recommendation for approval. Thank you very much.
Councillor Mason, as you've waited so patiently. Well, as you've referred the item. And you just put your microphone on there, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I was concerned about this application, which is why I've referred it. There are three main areas of concern. In the officer's original report, work on altering the premises had already begun, and on the 20th it was confirmed that the company was already operating from this site. Therefore, this is now a retrospective application, with the applicant now operating from the premises, despite being aware that the Development Committee were determining this tonight. I was surprised to hear the officer presenting saying that there were no objections for Essex Highways, because as late as Monday, the officer told me that they had had no communication from Essex Highways despite asking for information from them prior to December. So I'm not sure what the situation is there. That the officer advised that they had not responded. At the highway assessment of the B1013 during the last allocation of sites, when the Christmas Tree Farm estate was developed, the road was deemed to be at about 80%, which was described as almost to capacity. Capacity is less than 100%, which of course we would assume. The information regarding the anticipated amount of traffic has varied, but the latest information available has been 2 articulated lorries per day, 3 vans, the number of visits not specified, and 10 staff. The staff members alone could create 40 car movements a day. One of the justifications for this is that the vehicle movements would be no more than the existing use. However, as we have heard, the buildings have been redundant for some time, so there is in fact no existing use, and that would mean that the proposal does not satisfy 10.2 in the officer's report. And since the time when the poultry sheds were there, the volume of traffic has increased on the B1013. However, I don't know the situation because I wasn't aware that Essex Highways had responded. The main concern regarding this application is the change of use from Greenbelt to B8, a wide-ranging class that covers storage and distribution, including wholesale warehousing, distribution centres and repositories. Examples of B8 use could be a supermarket distribution centre or individual storage units for the public, and could create an unacceptable volume of traffic movement. Therefore, should the committee decide to grant this application, I would trust that conditions to prevent excessive use in this area are imposed. The previous proposal for a grain store was refused and the appeal dismissed. In my view, this is a much more commercial and inappropriate use of this site, with the potential for uncontrollable intensification. The site lies partly within the Roach Valley Special Landscape Area and is in the Greenbelt, and no very special circumstances to deviate from the RDC's policy and as stated before, this does not satisfy all the criteria in section 10. The officer and I have researched on Google, and we have found that at their other industrial locations, and all their other locations are that we could find were on industrial sites. The company operate 8:30 to 5:30, yet they are requesting much longer hours of operation in this rural location. My main concern remains about the appropriateness of this use in this location. I would ask the committee to consider carefully whether or not this application should be approved. Should the committee decide to approve this application, I would suggest the following conditions. No public or wholesale from the site, and that is in line with an agreement and information provided by the applicant. That the use hereby permitted should not take place, and no delivery should be taken at or dispatched from the site outside the hours of 8 to 6 p.m. Monday to Friday, in line with the application, but not permitted on Saturdays or Sundays. No plant machinery should be operated before 8 a.m. or after 6 p.m. Unfortunately, despite asking, we don't know what the nature of the business is, so the conditions that I'm suggesting have to cover a wide remit, and also for possible future B8 use. No external lighting should be installed and or operated in any part of the site unless details have been submitted to and approved in writing by the local authority. And the external area must not be used for any other purpose other than staff and visitor parking. No goods, articles, products or other materials, together with plant, machinery or equipment, whether or not requisite for the use of the site, should be stored or deposited externally. So I'll leave it up to the members to decide whether this is an appropriate use and whether they feel that by adding on a few conditions that the use would be acceptable in that area.
Thank you. Councillor Steptoe.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm going to disagree somewhat with the previous speaker. The use of these buildings, yes, I'll agree, haven't been in use for some time, but I think there are schemes, there are encouragements, certainly from central government, to look at bringing disused farm buildings in particular back into use. So I'm quite happy to encourage that. I don't have any particular concerns around vehicle movements. I don't anticipate it being 40-ton Arctics coming in and out of there because of the sheer movement. It is a farm road where tractors and things have, for many years, have been used. Okay, haven't been much for the last few years, but there's nothing to stop that from happening. A couple of concerns I do have, though. One is with the doors that are being installed with regards to noise. Roller shutters aren't the quietest door to open and close, so I'd like some sort of clarification on how they're being going to be operated. With regards to the hours, I don't have a problem between Monday to Friday 8 till 6. I don't have a problem with that, and I don't have a problem with no use on Sundays and bank holidays. But I do think we should, or the committee should, allow some use on a Saturday, maybe just 8 till 1 or something along those lines. I think it would be unreasonable for this committee to impose no use at all on a Saturday. I think that's about all I have to say, Chairman. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Stanley, you indicated.
Thank you, Chairman. For obvious reasons, there are 4 large buildings that may be used by separate ownerships. And yes, I can see that there could be quite considerable traffic in that area. However, I agree with what's been said already as 8 till 6. I'd like to see, and also 8 till 12 on a Saturday with Sundays and bank holidays excluded. The other thing that really worries me a little bit is the fact that have we put any condition on for retail usage of these premises? I don't know if we have. Perhaps the officer could let me know. But as for the shutters, they are now quite silent. They're plastic coated. They're very, I mean, you wouldn't even hear them go up or down these days, especially if they're motorised. They are really, really quiet. So I shouldn't have any problems with the shutters. These are new era on doors and closures that we have, and they are really, really quiet. So I don't see any problem with those at all. That is my only concern.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Gil?
Thank you, Chairman. To a certain extent, I must agree with the comments by Councillor and Mrs Mason. I am concerned about what could possibly be stored in this site, and can we impose a condition that no dangerous materials would be stored there?
No.
No? Why not?
That's a separate set of legislation. This is planning permission.
But surely this is part of planning.
No. It's a licensing thing.
I am concerned about the traffic as well. The splay at Gusted Hall Lane onto the B1013 is very small. You try and get an Arctic turning in, especially out of that turning, I wouldn't be surprised if the wheels of the trailer possibly could end up in the ditch there.
Okay.
So,
Thank you. Sorry.
No, sorry, I thought you wanted to comment on that.
Finish. I think, members, we do have to be particularly aware of the previous use. It might not happen for a couple of years, but it can start again tomorrow with the previous level of heavy vehicle movements and so on. I agree with Councillor Septo when he was speaking about us supporting business. I would be happy to perhaps put a limitation on wholesale and public use, because this is a commercial premises. I think if you're talking about distribution, it's possibly unfair on a business to put restrictions over the weekend, and I don't have the level of concern that perhaps what some other members have expressed about Saturdays and Sundays, based on the fact that there has been notification to the usual parties and there haven't been any objections at all from any other parties. So I'd be happy to accept the officer's recommendation, just with one more condition regarding the removal of wholesale and public trading.
I think we could incorporate the restriction in relation to no public wholesale retail at all from the site at any time in relation to condition 3. So you could expand that just for clarification. So condition 3 already restricts the use solely to use within the B8 use class, but we can add in that other element.
Okay, members, I think it's a fairly straightforward one here. So I'll move to what, Councillor Stanley.
Can we still maintain the where we've put in no operation on the Sunday and bank holidays?
Well,
or is that any bank holidays?
I just make a comment.
To have the officers.
I think in relation to any condition, we need to understand the reason for it, and then this is the concern about the time limits relating to impact on residential, because actually the residential is quite a distance from the site, and those existing properties have a road outside, the main road outside those properties anyway. So I think we just need to unpick a bit more if we are going to change the timings, what the reason for that is, particularly given that the putting a further restriction is going to affect the business
Yeah.
that's seeking to occupy.
And be aware of other businesses operating with significantly higher levels of trade immediately adjacent to the site as well. Councillor Stanley then.
I'm just referring to heavy goods vehicles and not
Yeah,
to cars where other businesses are working on Saturdays
Yeah,
and Sundays. I'm
but
just considering that heavy goods vehicles
Yeah.
will actually make a
Heavy goods vehicle can go down that road at any time. There are no residential properties adjacent to this site. I just don't see that as sustainable. Well, members, I'm moving from the chair the recommendation as it's printed, with the addition of the expansion of item 3 regarding wholesale public. The item for approval is printed on 8.1.5 going on to 8.1.6. Those members that are in favour of the approval, please indicate. Those against? 2, 3. That item is carried. Thank you very much for your attendance. Meeting closed.
I was told on Monday that Highways hadn't responded, and then they tell me that should have come out as an addendum, so I'm going to complain about that.
citizen of Brisbane.